Colts Daily Fantasy Team Preview. I'm Jason Gilbo. With me is Russell Clay. Taking a look at the Colts this year, after a pretty down year of injuries where they missed Andrew Luck for more than half the year. And when you're dealing with Matt Hasselbeck at his age and
when you're dealing with the corpse of Andre Johnson.
Another good point, and a bad offensive line with an 80-year-old running back, it's never going to be a situation that turns out. And God bless Frank Gore for going out there and just giving 110% like he always does, because he did make the most of it.
Hey, you know what? God bless Ahmad Bradshaw, too, because for the few games he was in, I enjoyed his services. But, I guess we can jump right into running back. I expect Frank Gore to be better this year. Even if he isn't as good of a player, the offense around him is just going to be so much better. Obviously, we all hope Andrew Luck can stay on the field, but if he can, I think Frank Gore is going to rumble, stumble, and bumble his way to top 12 to 15 season-long running back performance. And then in DFS, I think he's going to be a cash game guy for sure.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, if you just look at last year's pricing, if they're able to beat a more efficient offense and kind of get Frank Gore, maybe he's definitely not going to have a heavier workload, but it's going to be a more efficient one. And I think that's going to be okay for him, especially if they use him down in the red zone, which I kind of expect them to more this year, just given the fact that, they're not going to run as many two tight end sets. There should be a little bit more running, especially down inside the 20. So I'm definitely going to be a fan of Gore on a week-to-week basis, just looking at certain matchups, just given the fact that he will be a cheap guy to kind of target as that secondary piece.
Something to note as well, his targets in 2015 were really strange for a running back. 58 targets to 34 receptions is just ridiculously inefficient for a running back. Because, I mean, when you think about what those targets are, they're usually dump-offs or screens, and rarely are they even running routes out of the backfield. So that should become a lot more efficient. And Gore, throughout his career, I mean, those last few years in San Francisco, he didn't get it that much under Harbaugh, but early on in his career, he was a very prolific receiving running back. So I think they're going to get back to more of that. What I think you saw in 2015 was more just like bailout targets, like, oh my God, I'm about to get sacked, and then they just throw it in his direction and count it as a target. So in terms of his workload, I agree, definitely getting less carries. Be on the lookout for Josh Ferguson and Robert Turbin to potentially spell him multiple times a game. If he goes down, we're going to be looking at some low-priced tournament running backs for this Colts team.
Yeah, definitely are. And I think, the running back situation, obviously, it's never been a huge factor in Indianapolis. It's always the glory of the passing game, as it has been for a long time now. And we can kind of dive into that. And obviously the addition of kind of adding Andrew Luck back into the mix, and given that he stays healthy and is 100% healthy, everyone's stock goes up. I mean, T.Y. Hilton performs at a much higher rate. Moncrief, obviously Moncrief was solid last year, especially down the stretch, even with a mediocre passing game. And then, missing Coby Fleener with him in New Orleans, that kind of opens things up for Dwayne Allen. I'm excited to see kind of where this offense goes, and I think it's going to be a fun one for DFS.
So something that was very perplexing when it happened was the draft selection of Philip Dorsett in 2015 in the first round at the end there, because they were picking low because they were a good team. But it was very perplexing at the time because you looked at their roster construction. You said, okay, they have Hilton, they have an emerging Moncrief, and then they have these two tight ends, Fleener and Allen, who Allen can't really stay healthy, but when he is, he's a great option. Fleener's a great receiving down guy. So what's going on here? Where does Dorsett fit? Later, Fleener's gone, and this selection makes a lot more sense to me in terms of the Colts are going to go a lot more three wide out sets this year. It's just basically the way it's going to go. As long as all three receivers are healthy, I could see all of them getting over 70 targets, which mostly meaning Dorsett. And obviously Hilton and Moncrief both going to get Moncrief definitely over 100. I don't know how much north of that he's going, but I think Hilton will see a similar target share as he did last year. But back to Dorsett, I mean, 60 to 80 targets, but they could be highly efficient and tournament valuable targets. So he's going to be a week-to-week guy that you can exploit against bad secondaries. And then Dwayne Allen's the real wild card here. I don't know what to think of him. It seems like he has big fanboys. Ever since he was drafted, everyone been claiming he was going to emerge over Fleener since they were drafted together back-to-back in 2013, I believe. 2012, 2013, yeah. Something like that. And it just hasn't happened. He hasn't been able to stay healthy. I could see him being a good tournament guy, but I'm not nearly as high on him as everyone else is.
No, I agree. I think Dwayne Allen's going to be one of those guys where if tight end's not going to be a priority for me and I need to kind of stick someone average in price, Dwayne Allen's going to be a popular guy that I use. And that's just solely based on the fact that, you know, I do expect the efficiency to go back up for Luck in the Colts offense. And they are, and I was one of those people against the Dorsett pick because I just didn't agree with it. But now looking, after him, there's no one there. And it's an extremely really thin receiving core, and you don't really have anyone outside of Allen either. So if Allen goes down, I'll be really curious to see what happens as far as any sort of tight end situation. But I agree. I like Dorsett quite a bit in tournaments. I think he's going to be a fun guy to target. Where does he rank for you as kind of those home run threats type wide receivers? I mean, is he up there? Is he going to be a top 3 guy to give you a look at each week, or is he just kind of be maybe a little less hopeful?
It's tough to know his range. Obviously, super fast. We do know that from his Combine 40. Super prolific in college in terms of statistics, but was never really a huge volume guy. He was kind of just that every week or so. And I mean, in college it's different because obviously he was much more athletic than all the college guys. But I mean, it was like every other week he'd come with a huge reception, get to 100 yards or something like that. But in the NFL, I kind of just see him being an once every few weeks type of guy. And I think that's fine with this offense. Kind of limits what you expect as a fantasy asset, though, and especially in DFS. But again, certain weeks, though, he's going to be a really nice tournament option.
Yeah, definitely. And I think the one thing I have just a small concern of is the fact that kind of like the Saints a few years ago when they had all those targets, when they had Jimmy Graham, when Marcus Colston was playing well, Meacham, you had a Lance Moore. It was never quite the guys you expected. It always was kind of a random guessing game each week who was going to get it. That could potentially be something here with the Colts. I mean, obviously I expect Hilton to come away with the majority of the volume, but still, there's still kind of that, okay, it still could be a Dorsett week. It could be a Allen week. It could be a Moncrief week. And it could be that just, again, kind of similar to the Saints that were a few years ago.
Oh, it's going to be frustrating. And we talked about Dwayne Allen. There's going to be weeks where he gets 3 receptions for 15 yards and 2 touchdowns. You know, there's just going to be those weeks. And, you know, yeah, I think the Saints is a really good comparison from a few years ago. You talk about Robert Meacham, you talk about Devery Henderson, Lance Moore. All those guys are just – it's just a drag some weeks. Because then you end up with the Moncrief who gets 7 for 80 yards and you're just left out to dry. But yeah, you're tugging at my heartstrings with Robert Meacham reference there. That hurts.
As far as the strength of schedule goes for the Colts, it's okay. It's nothing spectacular. The one thing that I do know with them is they go and play in London in week 4, and then they don't have their bye till week 10. I just wonder if that's going to take a little bit of an issue coming back. I mean, I think that's going to be one thing to note come week 5. I'm going to probably be a little hesitant on deploying them. Just a small kind of little tidbit there to talk about for the schedule.
Yeah, and that's absolutely something we're going to look closer towards, that actual game. But yeah, that's a big deal. I mean, they are normal people, you know. Everyone gets jet lagged, so that next week could definitely be a big letdown.
Yeah, definitely. And as far as attacking this defense, I'm fine with doing that. This defense, you know, they obviously have a couple of names, but they're nothing spectacular. Vontae Davis is a guy who, you know, occasionally is on a questionable basis week to week. I feel like they're going to be involved in shootouts. I think they play a little bit better at home. There's a little bit more of an urgency. But outside of that, I expect a lot of shootouts between these Colts teams.
Right. And just like Andrew Luck from the first few years of his career, I mean, just dinking and dunking, and then when his team gets down 15 in the fourth quarter, somehow leads them to a comeback victory, and a lot of fantasy points happen. So I expect Andrew Luck to get back to that 35-40 passing touchdown pace, 4,500 passing yards. I mean, that's what I expect, and to be a top 5 quarterback pretty much every week, unless it's a really tough matchup.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. I think the safest play out of that whole Indy group is going to be Luck on a week-to-week basis because you don't have to guess with Luck as far as where the targets are going.
Mm-hmm.
So that's going to wrap it up with our Colts breakdown. Be sure to check out the rest of the teams at dailyfantasycafe.com.